Are you getting ready to send your child or yourself off to college, but now you're wondering how in the heck to pay for it? Stay tuned to get some great suggestions about financial aid on the next Connecting Our Community. Hi, I'm Pat Shoemaker. Welcome to Connecting Our Community. Our guests this evening, we have two of them. Our first one is Tara Carew, and she's the Director of Financial Aid at Anne Arundel Community College. And our second guest is Shanna Kibler, and she's the Assistant Director for State Programs and Scholarships, also at Anne Arundel Community College. And even though we all do work at Anne Arundel, this is not related in any way to any specific college. It's financial aid for anyone and everyone going to college. So first of all, I use the term financial aid. Tara, what is financial aid?
So financial aid is interesting because it's a number of different options for students. So students have the option to use grant funding, which is funding that does not need to be paid back. So it's money that the students get to pay for their education. Another source of funding could be student loans. Now, student loans, of course, are loans, so they do need to be paid back. There are also scholarships, and there are scholarships available often through the school that you're going to be attending, but also through the communities. There are some outside scholarships that are also available. The other component with financial aid, especially in the state of Maryland, is that we have a lot of Maryland state funding. So there will be a lot of opportunities for scholarships and grants through Maryland. And so students, especially students here in the state of Maryland, have a lot of opportunities for different sources and different types of aid.
And how would a student apply for financial aid?
The first step in applying for financial aid is to fill out the FAFSA, and that's the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. And the FAFSA is, it's one big application that's used by pretty much everyone in the United States. So regardless of which college you're going to, everybody's going to fill out the same application.
And for the state of Maryland, what application would students have to do?
So students who are eligible to complete the FAFSA need to complete the FAFSA, and they need to do it by March 1st. That's the Maryland state deadline, is March 1st. However, new for the 1920 academic year, students who cannot fill out the FAFSA because of citizenship status, if they're eligible for in-state tuition and fees at the community college, they can fill out what's called the MISFA, which is the Maryland State Financial Aid Application, which mimics very closely the FAFSA, and that will allow them to apply for some of the Maryland state aid programs, and that also needs to be completed by March 1st each year.
That's brand new. That's
brand new.
Yeah,
Yes.
That's terrific. Do you think that that will get to a lot more students who in the past would have been eligible for aid but aren't because of the citizenship question?
Yes, yeah. This year there was a very short window of opportunity for students to fill it out by the March 1st deadline. It came out February 1st, I believe, and it had to be due by March 1st in order to qualify for some of the larger state aid programs, so the Educational Assistance Grant, Guaranteed Access Grant. Those are awarded through the state of Maryland, and that required that March 1st deadline, but students can still fill out the MISFA even though the March 1st deadline has passed, and that would allow them to apply for some of what they call the decentralized aid programs from the state of Maryland, where individual schools get a set dollar amount each year that they can award to students for Maryland part-time grants, so for students who aren't planning to go full-time, and then also for the Educational Assistance Grant. There's a campus-based branch of that the schools actually award. So they can use that MISFA application to apply for those two programs.
And is there an age limit?
There's no age limit for completing the MISFA as long as they qualify for state tuition and fees at a community college. They can complete that application. There's no age limit on that.
And for federal aid?
Yes, so for federal aid, Shannon brought up a very good point. In the state of Maryland, we try to include or make sure everybody is aware that to receive state funding, most of the requirements or most of the awards have a deadline of March 1st. But we do want to remind students that the FAFSA is out there year-round. So even if they miss that March 1st deadline, they still want to fill out the FAFSA for the current year, the year that they're currently attending, but also keep an eye on the new applications that are coming out. So for example, let's say it's November, December, you may have an application out for the current year, a FAFSA application out for the current year, but they've also opened up the FAFSA now for next year. So you want to make sure that you're keeping an eye on the dates so that you're completing the FAFSA for the current year, but also completing the FAFSA for the next year if you intend to go to school for the following year.
And how often do you have to do a FAFSA? So if you do it for, let's say you're currently a freshman, you've done the FAFSA,
Yeah,
you never have to do it again.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and we have that question is really common in the high schools because a lot of our seniors are like, oh yeah, I'm going to do this application once and I'll be set. No, the FAFSA it's an annual application, so it does need to be filled out every year, and we like to tell students that in the fall, maybe around Thanksgiving time or so, that's the perfect time to think, okay, it's a new year, new FAFSA. So every year, fill out a new FAFSA. Get it out of the way early, so when you're later in the year, you can focus on other things like college applications and other things that are coming up. But get the FAFSA out of the way in the fall every year, and you'll be set to go for the next year.
And the March 1st deadline for the state, what about for individual colleges? Do they go by the March 1st deadline?
A lot of them have earlier deadlines than that. So some of them will have deadlines in February. So even though you've met the March 1st deadline, you might not have met your school's what they call their priority deadline.
Yeah.
So depending on what schools you're looking at, you want to look at their deadlines, additional applications, things like that, because some schools will use the FAFSA, of course, for federal aid, but then they'll have other sources of institutional aid or scholarship aid, and they will require additional forms and applications and things like that for those types of aid. So being aware of those forms, those processes, and those deadlines is really important.
And I think the deadline part of it is really huge. If you miss a priority deadline, you may be eligible for something and not end up getting it.
And that is the number one reason that students miss out on aid is they miss deadlines or they miss a part of the process. They're not aware of even additional opportunities or different applications that they need to complete.
And how much does it cost to do all of this?
Well, the FAFSA is actually a free application, so it's a free application for federal student aid. But the one thing we do like to remind students, there are, from time to time, websites out there that will advertise that they will take care of the FAFSA for you. The FAFSA application only takes about 30 minutes to complete. If you have all of your tax documents with you, and we always like to recommend students put together a little folder before they sit down to do the FAFSA. Put your tax returns in there. Make sure if you're a dependent that your parents are nearby. Get everything together. Make sure you have your social security number. You have access to a phone so that you can verify your FAFSA ID. And just get everything together before you sit down. And it really only takes about 30 minutes to fill out the FAFSA. So don't rely on someone else or a third party to fill out the FAFSA for you. It's a free application, and it's always good to do it one time by yourself because you're going to do it again and again and again year after year.
Yeah. And is there anything special other than the tax information that you would need to get into the FAFSA system? Do you have to have a code or?
You do have to have a FAFSA ID, and so you'll log in ahead of time, and they will send you verification information, and you'll verify your identity and pick up a FAFSA ID. If you're a dependent, your parent will also need to do this. And it's a way of almost like digitally signing your FAFSA. And another thing you want to keep in mind too is that you can put up to 10 schools on your FAFSA. So keep a list of the different schools that you're interested in applying for, and then you can put it all in the FAFSA the first time you fill it out, and you're ready to go, and you won't have to add stuff later.
And for Maryland state aid, what about students who think, oh, I'm going to Harvard, and then reality hits, and either they realize it's too expensive or they're never getting into Harvard. So,
That's a good
so is it possible to go back and add the schools, or?
It is. So you can go back and add schools, but what we suggest that students do is that they include at least one Maryland State school on their FAFSA application, because even though they might meet that March 1st deadline, if there's not a Maryland State school listed on their FAFSA, they're not likely to be awarded any state aid, because state aid has to stay within the state of Maryland. So that means you have to use it at a state of Maryland school. If you go outside of the state, you can appeal to the Maryland Higher Education Commission to take your award with you outside the state, but those are only on very certain circumstances where your program of study is not offered within the state of Maryland.
And so the chances of a program of study not being offered at any school in the state of Maryland.
Not high, right.
So it's a free application. We know that. You have to do it for every school year, but what if it gets to be January and you haven't done your taxes yet for that year?
Well, we're working with prior year now. So this happened, I guess, about 2 years ago now. And so you're really, I mean, you do have plenty of time to get your taxes in because it used to be that we would deal with the current year. And so a lot of times people would fill out the FAFSA, then complete their taxes and go back in and make corrections or edits to their FAFSA. Right now, we're very lucky and fortunate to be able to have the look back period to be a prior years. So hopefully everybody will have their taxes done by that time. If they don't, you can note that on the FAFSA and you can come back and fill this portion in later, but your FAFSA will be incomplete. So you do want to make sure you have the taxes done, ideally beforehand.
Yeah. And are there any other tips about doing the FAFSA, things that people seem to make mistakes about on a general, regular basis? Things like saying they can't get their parents' information.
Actually, I think the one that I've seen quite often, and it's one that when we're in the high schools and we're talking to groups, we find this comes up a bit. The FAFSA belongs to the student. It's the student's application. And we will find at times that the parent will sit down to do the FAFSA, and so they'll be answering questions about themselves. So they'll say, well, what is your income and what is your educational background? And then they'll switch to the next section. It says, what is your parents' information? And then they're going, oh, I've already filled this out. So it does get a little confusing when the parents are filling out the student's FAFSA. So really, ideally, it's the student's FAFSA. If the parent can be nearby or sitting next to the student, that's helpful. But it is actually the student's FAFSA. So you want to make sure the student is the one answering the questions because the questions are all directed toward the student.
And it's all student-driven with parent information.
With parent information, yeah.
And that's what a lot of times students will have questions about, who constitutes a parent for the FAFSA, because a lot of times, we all have different family relationships that, are built, and so they'll call or they'll ask us questions about that. So my general suggestion to all students is that if you have a question while you're completing the FAFSA, to call the school. You can either call the community college where you live, you can call the school you're planning to attend, but just to reach out to a financial aid office to ask those questions. Because we don't always find these errors unless students are selected for verification. So if a student is selected for verification, we may find, oh, you've said that you've only have 2 members of household family members and you really have 5, and that can change a student's eligibility. So rather than making those mistakes and impacting their eligibility, if they have those questions, they really need to reach out to a financial aid office and just make sure that they're completing it correctly.
And believe it or not, we are coming to our first break, so we will be back with lots more information. Please stay tuned to Connecting Our Community.
I'm Alejandro Escobedo. Music has always been my life, but that was almost taken away from me by hepatitis C. Thankfully, I received treatment and stopped cancer before it started. Yes, cancer. Most people don't know there's a link between certain viruses and cancer. I didn't know, but I do now, and so should you. That's why I've partnered with the Prevent Cancer Foundation. The 3 most common viruses linked to cancer are human papillomavirus, or HPV, hepatitis B, and hepatitis C. Every year, more than 27,000 men and women are diagnosed with a cancer caused by HPV, and up to 65% of all liver cancers are caused by Hep B or C. These cancers are preventable. Getting screened, vaccinated, and treated isn't scary, but cancer is. For more information, visit thinkaboutthelink.org. Together, we can stop cancer before it starts.
Hi, welcome back to Connecting Our Community. We have a very interesting discussion going about financial aid, different types. In the first half, we were discussing a lot about the FAFSA, but I know that everybody wants to find out about the state of Maryland and the free community college. So tell us how that's working.
So free community college is a bit of a misnomer. It's not necessarily where all students, if they live in the state of Maryland, automatically get this scholarship. It's actually known as the Maryland Promise, Maryland Community College Promise Scholarship, and it's considered a last dollar scholarship. So what that means is that students who have other types of aid, so maybe Pell Grants, maybe other types of aid from the state of Maryland or scholarships, all of that aid that's considered gift aid, which means aid that you do not need to pay back, so everything pretty much but your loans, goes towards your bill first, and then anything that is unpaid after those forms of assistance can potentially be covered by the Maryland Promise Scholarship. In order for students to qualify for that, they have to have completed the FAFSA by March 1st, and they must respond to the state of Maryland's request for additional documentation. So the state of Maryland has already begun sending out notification to students who completed the FAFSA by March 1st who meet the qualifications for the award, notifying them of additional documentations that are due, and the due date, as it's been communicated to us at this point in time, is June 15th.
And so what other things might they need to submit, or is there an income level, and are there strings attached
Yes.
if they're awarded?
Yes. So there is an income level that students must meet. So if the student is in a one-parent household, then they must meet the $100,000 income threshold. If it's a two-parent household, it's $150,000 income threshold.
So can't the household income, including the student's income?
I
or
believe
just
so.
parent?
So the state of Maryland is actually taking a look at the FAFSA as it comes in, and they're looking at the total household income is what my understanding of how they're administering the award is. And students must be within 2 years of graduating high school. So it's not just kind of for everyone. You must be planning to enroll full-time at a Maryland community college within 2 years of graduating high school,
And-
or
Sorry.
receiving your GED.
What about the work component after graduation?
Yes, so there is a service component. So again, like we say, that's not necessarily free community college, because there is a service component tied to the award. So for every year the student receives it, they must work for 1 year in order for the award to not convert to a loan. With this, there's kind of some moving parts still in play with this award. As it's currently written in the law, it does state that the student must work 1 year within the state of Maryland. However, there is an emergency bill that may have just been signed today, I believe, that is looking to adjust that so that students must work full-time and file taxes in the state of Maryland. So there is still some moving parts to that, but students who are eligible for the award will receive notification if they're eligible from the state of Maryland, and with that will come a promissory note that they'll have to sign with the state that will outline sort of the ins and outs of the award and the service component as well.
Oh, that's good. And there are other state awards. Do you want to tell us some of those?
So I mentioned a little bit earlier the Guaranteed Access Grant. That is a wonderful award. It's a pretty significant award that students can get to pay for almost up to their full cost of tuition and fees, as well as there is housing allowance built into that as well, so that students can use that if they're living, especially on campus, to pay for some of their housing. It's a pretty significant award, and students must again fill out the FAFSA by March 1st. And they have to have completed the additional documentation requested by the state of Maryland. So there is additional documentation that is tied to that award. And then there's also the Educational Assistance Grant, which is a pretty big award as well. And that goes pretty far away at a community college towards paying tuition and fees. And then they also have legislative scholarships, so scholarships through the senators and delegates. A lot of them do require that the student complete the FAFSA by March 1st, but some of them have their own separate application processes. So we tell students to reach out to their senators, reach out to their delegates, and make sure that they're not missing any additional opportunities there.
So if a student does the FAFSA and let's say gets a federal grant, is that it? Are they allowed to then still reach out to their other organizations or the state of Maryland or whatever, or is there a cap that students are only allowed to get
Yeah.
a certain amount?
That's a very good question. So we always encourage students to explore all options. So students can receive the let's say federal Pell Grant, possibly feel a need to take out additional loans. But before taking out loans, we always want to say to a student, please, please, please research all options for aid. So you can receive a federal Pell Grant. You could also possibly receive the Educational Assistance Grant. There are often scholarship opportunities through the school that you're attending. So we always encourage students to fill out all necessary scholarship applications at the school that you're considering so that you're in the pool for those scholarships. And after kind of gathering all of the grants and scholarship opportunities, at that point, doing a true assessment of how much need you have left, and then deciding on maybe doing a student loan. So you can, you know, pile all the different scholarships and grants on top of each other to have a really nice aid package. But we always want to encourage students to do scholarships and grants first, whether it's at the federal level, state level, institutional level. And then on top of all of that, if there is still some need left, that's the opportunity to fill in with student loans.
Yeah. And what about working on campus, getting a job on campus?
Federal Work Study. The Federal Work Study program is fairly robust, so it's available on most campuses. And it is an opportunity for students to work on campus, and a lot of times they'll work in departments where they're able to work around their school schedule. It gives them an opportunity to possibly be involved in a department that is related to what they're going to be going into, to their careers. And the funding comes from the federal student aid program.
Yeah.
So they're getting funding through the federal system, but they're getting it by working on campus.
So there are a lot of opportunities other than student loans. Student loans are in the news and,
Yeah.
loans, but there really are a lot of opportunities to get what would be called free money that you don't have to pay back.
Absolutely. It does take some legwork. There are a lot of different avenues to research, but the main thing is watch the deadlines, make sure you're filling out every single application that you have an opportunity to fill out, and do your research. Talk to the school, talk to people in your community. A lot of times we find students will find funding through their high schools, through possibly a religious affiliation, through their church. And just different community organizations will have funding for students, and every little bit adds up. So a student will possibly pull in 2 or 3 private scholarships, state scholarships, federal funding, and you put it all together and it can be a pretty nice aid package.
Yeah. And so for private scholarships, meaning not from the state of Maryland, not from the federal government, not from the college that you'll be attending, do you have any tips on how to guarantee that you're going to get a scholarship?
So there's nothing that can guarantee that you'll get a scholarship. But what I tell students is to be wary of any site that offers a guarantee of aid in exchange for money. That all aid resources should ideally be free. The sites that you pay money for they don't have access to any secret bank of money or secret database of different scholarships. It's the same scholarships that are out there on the web, and there are tons of them out there, and there's tons of money that goes unawarded each year because students just don't apply. So the secret tip really is just to make sure that you apply, to actually put in the legwork to researching the scholarships, making sure that you're applying for them, kind of looking at whether or not a scholarship is local, is it nationwide? Of course, if you're, more local, you're a bigger fish in a smaller pond than if it's a nationwide scholarship, because it is a lot of work, but you want to make sure that you're, putting in the effort and that your efforts are, kind of focused. You're not sort of just throwing it to the wind.
Right. And Tara, any additions to that?
Well, I think the big thing to keep in mind as well is when you're going through and you've been awarded an aid package, we want to make sure that students also keep in mind that in order to have several of these awards renewed for the following year, you do want to make sure you know the requirements of your different awards. So the awards that you're getting at a federal level may be very different than the requirements for your state awards. Those awards could be very different from any scholarship awards that you're getting. So make sure you know what aid you're receiving, what the requirements are for that aid, and also who to talk to if you have any questions about that particular award.
Yeah. And so it's always best to really talk to the financial aid administrators at the college that you plan to attend. If you plan to go to Towson and you're talking to somebody at Montgomery College, they may not have the
same aid package.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Or the final details of deadlines
Absolutely.
and things
And
like
I always
that.
encourage students to compare aid packages and shop around. Just because a school is more expensive doesn't mean that it won't be in the end out of pocket cheaper for you, because they may have additional aid resources to offer you that will bridge the gap between what the other school is offering you and what you're getting there. So I tell students, definitely shop around for aid, compare aid packages, take a look at at what your out-of-pocket costs would be after all your gift aid or what you would need to do in loans. But then also, like Tara mentioned, make sure you know the stipulations of the awards. We see a lot of students who sometimes transfer to the 2-year school after going to the 4-year school because they received an aid package that was just for that first year. There's a lot of initial scholarships that happen for the first year students to attract them, and they're not renewable. So the aid package a student receives in their first year can look vastly different from the aid package they get in the second year. So knowing whether or not it's renewable, making sure you're meeting those requirements, and then also kind of projecting out what your second year is going to look like.
Okay, and unfortunately we've come to the end of the show. Thank you both for being here. It was really interesting. I hope that you all enjoyed it and learned a lot as well. Thank you, Tara and Shanna, for joining us. If you have any other questions, contact the school, of course, that you plan to attend. You can do the financial aid application for federal aid at fafsa.gov, and you can also go to the Connecting Our Community blog on the mymcmedia.org website. Again, thank you for watching. I hope you learned a lot, and have a good time in college. We'll see you on the next edition of Connecting Our Community.